There's a moment in almost every successful YouTube channel's life where everything hangs in the balance, where one phone call, one handshake, one decision to say yes instead of no sets off a chain of events nobody saw coming. For Mike Morgan and Outdoors with the Morgans, that moment didn't come from a family fallout or a public meltdown. It came from a tractor, one sponsorship deal, one brand swap, and a community that felt like the guy they'd trusted for years had just pulled the rug out from under them. What followed split his fan base down the middle, put his name through the mud on public forums, and pushed him toward a second decision that quietly shaped everything the channel became. This is the story of both those decisions and what they actually cost him to make. Mike Morgan didn't grow up dreaming about YouTube. He grew up in Western Pennsylvania, did what Pennsylvania guys do, and built a life with his hands. For years, he worked heavy highway construction, not in management, not behind a desk, but out in the field as a blaster. The kind of job where you show up before sunrise and you don't leave until the work is done. When the company he'd been with got sold and the new direction didn't sit right with him, he made a move into oil and gas. Steadier work, good income, still a long way from anything resembling internet fame. On the side, he owned land that butted up against his mother's property out in Cranberry Township. He spent his free time the way a lot of rural Pennsylvanians do, cutting firewood, running equipment, building trail systems through the woods with his wife Melissa. They had 4 kids at home. Life wasn't slow by any stretch. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, with no real plan and no particular goal, Mike propped a cheap camera up against something solid, hit record, and filmed himself cutting firewood. He uploaded it, moved on, and didn't think much about it. Until the views started rolling in. 5,000 views on a firewood video sounds modest. But for someone who uploaded it expecting his immediate family to be the primary audience, it was enough to make him stop and pay attention. So he filmed another one. Same format, same energy, no script, no fancy editing, just a guy doing what he'd always done with a camera running nearby. That video did numbers too. Then the next one, what Mike had accidentally tapped into was an audience that YouTube had largely ignored. Rural landowners, sawmill guys, people who spent their weekends behind a chainsaw and their evenings watching tractor videos because nothing else on the platform spoke to them. They didn't want a polished lifestyle brand. They wanted someone who looked like them, worked like them, and didn't perform for the camera. Mike wasn't performing, he was just working. And that turned out to be exactly what hundreds of thousands of people had been waiting for. By the time the channel started gaining real traction, Mike had built something that most creators spend years trying to manufacture and never quite pull off: genuine trust. His viewers weren't casual fans. They were the kind of people who watched every upload, left long comments, and felt like they personally knew the guy. That kind of loyalty doesn't show up in subscriber counts. It shows up when things go wrong, and things were about to go wrong. For a while, Mike had been teasing big news, the kind of vague, exciting buildup that sends a loyal fan base into speculation overdrive. His community had a reasonable guess: a land purchase, maybe an equipment upgrade, something in line with the channel's direction. What they got instead was a tractor deal, specifically a partnership with Rural King, whose tractor line was a private label version of South Korean manufacturer TYM. Mike's Kubotas, the machines his audience had watched him run for years, the ones tied to some of the channel's most viewed content, were being set aside. He was upfront about it. He told his audience exactly what the arrangement was, that it was cooperative, that Rural King had reached out and the numbers made sense. He wasn't hiding anything, but that transparency, oddly enough, didn't soften the blow. For a chunk of his audience, it made things worse, because now it was confirmed. This wasn't just a guy using equipment he liked. This was a business arrangement, and once you see it that way, it's hard to unsee it. The forums lit up fast. Tractor by Net, one of the bigger online communities for equipment enthusiasts, became ground zero for the debate. Longtime subscribers who had recommended the channel to their friends were now publicly questioning whether any of it could be trusted. Comments like "this is just a commercial now" started appearing. Some people unsubscribed and said so out loud. Others called the whole thing a betrayal of what the channel had stood for. The frustration wasn't really about the tractor. Rural King's machines were reasonable value, rebadged TYMs with Yanmar engines, sold at prices that genuinely undercut the competition. The frustration was about what the deal represented. Mike Morgan had built his reputation on being the regular guy. No agenda, no corporate angle, just honest content from someone living the life he talked about. The moment a brand entered the picture, that image got complicated, and for a fan base that prided itself on being able to spot inauthenticity from a mile away, That complication stung. Not everyone turned on him. Plenty of viewers pushed back against the critics, pointing out that the equipment was still being genuinely used and tested on real projects, not just talked about in a studio. Mike wasn't doing fake demonstrations. He was running these machines on his actual property, doing actual work. But the louder voices were the skeptical ones, and in online communities, the loudest voices tend to shape the narrative. Most creators in that position would have stayed off the forums and let it blow over. Mike did the opposite. He showed up on Tractor.net himself, identified himself by name, and wrote out a long, direct response to his critics. No PR polish, no carefully worded statement, just Mike Morgan typing what he actually thought. He talked about where he came from, the construction background, the years working as a blaster, the move into oil and gas. He talked about his family, his land, why he started the channel in the first place, and then he addressed the sponsorship head-on. His argument was straightforward. His reputation was worth more to him than any single deal. If he misrepresented a product and his viewers found out, the trust he'd spent years building would be gone overnight, and no brand partnership was worth that trade. He also pointed out something the critics hadn't considered. In most cases, he sought out partnerships with products he was already using and already believed in. The sponsorship followed the passion, not the other way around. It was a gutsy move. Walking into a hostile forum and putting your name on a public defense is the kind of thing most people talk themselves out of. Whether it fully worked is a different question. Some people were won over, others had already made up their minds, but it established something important. This wasn't a guy who was going to quietly absorb criticism and move on. He was going to say his piece, on the record, with his real name attached. The Rural King arrangement eventually ran its course. Mike moved on from the partnership and his Kubotas made their way back into the videos. For the viewers who'd never left, it felt like a return to form. For the critics, it felt like confirmation of everything they'd said. The told you so energy was immediate. If the deal had been genuine, the argument went, why walk away? Why not stick with the brand? What those critics missed was the context. Equipment partnerships in the YouTube space aren't always permanent arrangements. They run for a defined period, serve a purpose for both parties, and then both sides move in different directions. The fact that the arrangement ended didn't mean it was fraudulent. It meant it was a business deal, which is exactly what Mike had said it was from day one. But nuance rarely wins in comment sections, and for a portion of his former audience, the damage was already done. Here's where the story gets interesting. Because after the Rural King situation settled, Mike made a move that nobody was expecting. Instead of lining up the next sponsorship, instead of filling that gap with another brand relationship, he went in the opposite direction entirely. He bought his own equipment outright, his own Kubotas purchased with his own money, with no manufacturer obligations attached. What he ran on camera was what he owned. What he said about a product was what he actually thought. It sounds simple, but in a space where brand deals are how a lot of creators fund their operations, choosing to go fully independent is a significant financial call. It meant less guaranteed income. It also meant that when Mike talked about a piece of equipment on camera, nobody could reasonably question his motive. The bias argument, the one that had followed him through the Rural King controversy, essentially evaporated. His audience noticed, not all at once and not loudly, but the tone in the comments shifted. The skepticism that had crept into his community started to recede. People who'd walked away quietly came back. New subscribers found the channel and found exactly what the original audience had found years earlier. A guy who worked hard, spoke plainly, and wasn't trying to sell you something every other sentence. Today, Outdoors with the Morgans sits at over 414,000 subscribers with more than 280 million total views across 2,300 plus videos. The channel isn't just a YouTube presence anymore. It's the center of a legitimate rural business operation. Mike and Melissa run a firewood and sawmill business out of their western Pennsylvania property. They sell a branded fire starter through their own website. There's apparel, there's an Amazon storefront. The whole operation has an estimated net worth pushing close to $2.7 million when you factor in the land, the equipment fleet, and the online business side of things. And the content keeps evolving. Recent videos have followed Mike through a new home build project on the property, the kind of long-form, ongoing story arc that keeps viewers coming back week after week. It's the same formula that worked in 2016, just scaled up. Real projects, real outcomes. A camera running while the work gets done. The tractor controversy feels like a long time ago now, and in fairness, it probably should. What it actually was, stripped of all the forum drama, was a creator navigating a business decision in public, making a call, facing the consequences, and adjusting course. That's not a scandal. That's just what building something looks like from the inside. Mike Morgan didn't change who he was during any of it. He just figured out, the hard way, that his audience needed to see that proven rather than promised. The decision that changed outdoors with the Morgans forever wasn't the one that caused the controversy. It was the one that came after. The choice to walk away from easy money and let the work speak for itself again. That's a harder call than it sounds, and most people in that position don't make it. The channel that exists today with its loyal community and its quiet empire built out of firewood and sawdust is the direct result of that second decision. And if you ask the people who've watched from the beginning, that's exactly the version of the channel they always hoped they were getting.